Joseph Lindsley in Kharkiv today. Russia's war in Ukraine among the top agenda items for NATO leaders. And what are you hearing, Joseph?
Hey, Bob. Well, good afternoon from Kharkiv. And first, I'll tell you where I am. Well, as I speak, we have nationwide air alarms due to Russian MiGs flying somewhere over the Russian Federation. Just a precautionary alarm. And I'm talking to you from the famous Držprom building here in the center of Kharkiv. It's a monument of constructivist architecture on the largest square in Europe. And this was built in the Soviet times. It was really the first skyscraper complex in Europe. It's a beautiful building on the outside. And the studio from which I speak to you is the home of the Kharkiv Media Hub, which is a wartime project of volunteers here to help assist all the foreign journalists who come to Ukraine. But this same studio in Soviet times was home to Soviet state TV here in Kharkiv. And I just took a tour through the haunting hallways of this building. There's a lot of relics of Soviet times still here, even old radio and TV equipment. We turned a corner, there was a creepy plastic Soviet doll in a dark corner. And so my friends here say that they are working to exorcise that spirit of propaganda that inhabited this building for so long. But it's haunting to think that, from this place, they would broadcast, so many of those lies that on which the Soviet Union was built and in which they tried to oppress people. And now here, this is the very fight. Once again, it's not over. The fight continues on this square. In 2014, the pro-Russian sort of rebels that were busting from Russia tried to take over the administrative building of the city of Kharkiv, and the citizens resisted. That was in 2014. And so we once again are reminded of the long history of the Ukrainian resistance. Meanwhile, here it's a beautiful day in Kharkiv. I guess about the same temperature as Chicago right now, 72 degrees. And I took a walk through the park, and everything is so clean and full of life. The park is perfectly maintained. There's a zoo that is open. Kids are playing. People are sitting on the benches, and everything looks so lovely. But we know that underneath it, there's a lot of fear and trauma, and a lot of concern about what's ahead. And I just heard from one of our great volunteers in Poland, Beata. She was talking with a friend of ours from the Ukrainian city of Nikopol. Nikopol is that city. It used to be on the Kakhovka Reservoir. Most of that reservoir is now a mud flat. But across from Nikopol is the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, the largest nuclear plant in Europe. And for almost a year now, every single day and night, the Russians have shelled the city of Nikopol. And my friend Mike from Nikopol writes to us. He said, "I've come to my Nikopol, and here is a terrible situation. Every day is shelling, there is no water, and there is a threat of an explosion of the nuclear power plant from the Russians. So I'm trying to organize a humanitarian mission. But as every day, you're anyone who's in that city, you could be shelled at any moment. There's no notice, there's no alarm, because the Russians are so close. And to top it off, you have the fear of what could happen with the nuclear plant. And then it's hard to forget, but a few weeks ago, we were all talking about the Russians destroying that Novokakhovka dam. But there are still people who've been without running water that entire time. So that crisis is still ongoing. I know people who are traveling down to Kherson still to volunteer, but it remains a huge ecological and humanitarian crisis. And then I was talking with friends in Lviv who they still have ringing in their ears from that attack in Lviv last week, from that massive attack on a residential building in a very nice neighborhood in Lviv. They cannot get the ringing out of their ears. So as all this is happening, everyone's looking to the Nato Summit in Vilnius, in Lithuania, which, by the way, is a country that also suffered under Soviet oppression. And so the Lithuanians, it's very fitting that the summit is held in Lithuania because they understand the threat posed by the Russians historically and today. And I think we're going to have to really wait until after the summit, to know the full measure of it. But the two notable things right now, one, France said they're going to deliver long-term, long-range weapons to Ukraine, including the Storm Shadow missiles that the UK has already provided. I think this is pretty huge because President Macron has often been more reluctant than other world leaders. When Boris Johnson was here in Kyiv, Macron was still trying to speak with Putin. So it is a major development that France would send these long-range weapons to Ukraine, weapons that could theoretically reach the Crimean Peninsula, could reach the Russian naval base in Crimea. And also the president of Turkey, I think he sort of surprised the world, and I think a lot of people don't fully trust him, but he said that he would allow Sweden to join NATO. He was resisting that because the Swedes have free speech, and they've allowed people to burn the Quran in Stockholm. Not that they support that, but they support the principle of free speech. But Erdogan has said that he will accept Sweden's entering to NATO. We don't know if Sweden agreed to give anything up in return for that. But Erdogan did say that he wants Turkey to be a part of the European Union. Ever since he kind of took an autocratic turn, the EU has not been interested in welcoming Erdogan. So I think even though everything might sound like nice headlines now, I think there's going to be a lot of things that have to be figured out tomorrow and then in the ensuing weeks after the summit in Vilnius.
No doubt about it. And when you were talking about the history of the old Russian state TV, I was reminded that this is the week in 1991 that Boris Yeltsin took the oath as the first elected president of the Russian Republic. So much has changed since then, hasn't it?
Yeah, so much has, and then so much hasn't in some ways. And, we remember in 1990, I think it was 1991, President George H.W. Bush gave that Chicken Kyiv speech, so-called Chicken Kyiv, because he encouraged Ukraine not to break away from the Soviet Union. But Ukrainians that was their long dream. And it was the same in Lithuania. Lithuania had a series of protests to get out of the Soviet Union. The Soviets sent troops in. This long tradition of Russia not wanting to let go of free people. And meanwhile, before it gets too late into this week, there was an extraordinary moment, two extraordinary moments over the weekend in Western Ukraine. I think it was on Sunday. President Zelensky was in Lviv, and there were tons of people, maybe thousands of people gathered to welcome home the Azov fighters, who were the last defenders of that Azov steel plant in Mariupol. And with the help of Turkey and others, they were able to have a prisoner exchange. And these the former prisoners of war, these Azov fighter heroes, came back to Lviv. And you think every time we see images of Putin, he's always very far from the people, almost always. And Zelensky was there in the main boulevard, Freedom Boulevard of Lviv, surrounded by these recently released warriors and hundreds, if not a few thousand people. And it was also interesting that Zelensky was not center stage. Center stage was the commanders from the Azov battalion. And you really see there a real democracy. Zelensky is the representative of the people. He's not the king. He's not even the chieftain. Mm-hmm. And the people were there to honor their heroes. And then the other thing, the day before, President Zelensky and the president of Poland went to a city called Lutsk in northwest Ukraine to commemorate a massacre by Ukrainians of Poles almost 100 years ago now, not quite 100 years ago. And here you see, and I think this is the mentality of Ukraine from 2014, a nation that is not stuck in its past. It's a nation committed to being free, committed to even correcting past mistakes. And that's what the Poles and Ukrainians, they've been such good allies. And they had that moment. There was an early morning vigil to commemorate a previous massacre of Poles by Ukrainians. And so here we see, this could be the future if we can get out of these, sort of Soviet ways of thinking and the old alliances of hate and find new ways to cooperate in freedom and democracy.
If only. We continue to marvel at the courage and spirit of the people in Ukraine. Joseph, until tomorrow, peace.
Bob, until tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you for introducing Ukraine on your social media pages. That's very important that much more people can get more information about the situation here and how everybody can help Ukraine to stay stronger and to save all the world.
Что он сказал?
Well, which side are you on?
На чьей ты стороне?
Come on now. Oh, which side are you on?
На чьей ты стороне?